The universe is not at all what we suppose it to be, and that we are in effect presented with a three-dimensional, four-dimensional, 11-dimensional, a labyrinth, a puzzle, a kind of conundrum which has to be cut through. And it's all done in the mind. And it's all done in the mind. And it's all done in the mind. The whole apparent world is actually syntactical in nature. This is what they don't tell you in the philosophy departments or the physics departments, that the universe is made of words, and that there has to be a speaker and there has to be a hearer. Photons, quarks, anti-new, that's not what it's about. That is a linguistic model that floats above the bedrock of syntactical connectedness that mind travels through to create networks that it interprets meaningfully. That's what's really going on. And I am not one to reach for, the metaphors of spirit with the connotation of moral opprobrium and all that. There is a dimension which is accessible to each and every one of us. This is the primary thing about it. It's accessible, that is so appallingly, titanically, and bizarrely different than the continuum that we're currently residing in, that it seems to throw doubt on the entire effort to understand the world as it's been carried out over the past 1,500 years. In other words, there is an object in this mental space which, as culture-creating creatures, we are attempting to colonize and invade this cultural space through the concrescence of language. In other words, through exteriorizing our ideas as tools, we are invading this cultural domain, this alternative reality, and the exploration by drugs, with psychedelic drugs, and then the pervasive problem with other sorts of drugs in the society. And it cuts very close to the core of ourselves as creatures. I mean, we are addictive animals. We addict to everything. We addict to each other and glorify it as our most noble outpouring of sentiment in the phenomenon of romantic love. I mean, when a pair of lovers are parted, the withdrawal symptoms are indistinguishable from heroin. I mean, vomiting, shaking, uncontrollable emotional outbursts, sleeplessness, short temper, hysteria. This is real. It is what romantic love is a pheromonal bonding, an exchange of chemical messengers which takes these two autonomous organisms and welds them into one galaxy of need and intention and understanding and expectation. Well, then you just tear that apart and people are, shook up. We addict to political ideals, all kinds. People find an idea and it works, and all barriers appear to be movable and all goals attainable. We addict to things. This is like magpies, but then through media trained to propel ourselves into ever more extensive relationships with objects. We invent money, which is kind of a multi-transformable drug. It stands for everything, everything you ever wanted, and you can addict to money. Nevertheless, what I will argue, that this is not a bad thing, that we have a secret history that I will try to convince you of, and you should try to convince me that I'm wrong. And we will argue over the secret history of the human race and why it is, therefore, that we are as we are, and why it is that these psychedelics are not some peripheral issue of screwballs who can see God in a cabbage, but that, in fact, the issue of psychedelics is directly on the tracks of the onrushing locomotive of rationalist, paternalist, schlockoless society, and that it ain't going to go away, because what we're talking about here is a nude part of the human mind. What we're talking about here is something which takes its place in the great unfolding of the defining of human freedom that characterizes the entire adventure of global civilization. In other words, we've got the Pope under control. That happened in the Middle Ages. Slavery has now been generally embraced as a bad thing to be into, and we've gotten that on the books as a bad idea. Women have been suddenly recognized to be human beings, and so forth. So this swelling bubble of aha and perception of the real nature of the universe should also include the sudden realization that governments have no business telling people what foods and spices they should prefer, that this is an absurd role for government, and that, like slavery, like the subjugation of women, the legal persecution of dietary habits has just got to take its place with the high-button shoe. And we will talk a lot about the consequences of this. What does it mean? Because you see, what the government would have us believe, and perhaps believes itself, although I doubt it, is that we would return to the beast. That's all. We would just shoot junk and toot blow and flop around in ruinous orgies until hell froze over. And they, wiser, sterner, more disciplined than ourselves, represent the edifice of moral authority. This is I'm doing it for your own good trip, see? But I want to return for a minute to the transcendental object, because that's the part which gets me off the most. It's taken me a long time to believe what was actually happening, in that I always said I could believe it if I read it in the newspaper, but I can't believe it because it's happening to me, or it's happening so near to me. But I just, it hardly now seems to matter. And what we just have to do is to try and talk frankly based on the experience which each of us brings to this about, the thing. How much of it have you seen? Well, what do you think? How does it cast its shadow into your life? What is it? Because I talk on these subjects, I am a sort of a nexus point for information, and I gather stories, and I see that science and rational philosophy and all that stuff is going on over here quite to its heart's content, while hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of people, exactly like ourselves, are logging in these experiences, which are, absolutely off the scale. And I just don't, there are a lot of people having problems. People abducted by UFOs, people visited by Whitley Strieber's triangle face. That's not where I'm coming from. I have nothing but scorn for all weird ideas other than my own. And the reason I tolerate my own weird ideas is basically because of what I've gone through. I would never believe it if I hadn't seen it.